Hi y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tiana. If you have not done so, don't forget to go ahead and subscribe to my channel. That way you are notified whenever I come on. We are jumping into this video pretty quickly because this is going to be a long video, and it's going to be separated into two parts. The reason being is because this is a very extensive topic. Previously I had told you that I have an interest in talking about, serial killers, cults, and missing persons and stuff like that. So we are starting that here today. Just be mindful that a lot of this stuff is sensitive. Many of the things are graphic. So be cautious when you are listening to this video or watching this video. But I hope you guys enjoy learning about this stuff. This is something that we need to be mindful of and that we need to learn about. So, also I will be looking down here just because I have my notes on my laptop right here. So without further ado, let's jump into this video. On today's video, we are going to be talking about John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown. He was born March 17th, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. And the reason we are talking about him today is because he sexually assaulted, tortured, and murdered at least 33 boys and young men between 1972 and 1978 in Cook County, Illinois. He is the son of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson, and honestly, he had a tough upbringing. I'm not, justifying anything, but a lot of the reasons why I guess he turned out to be the person he was because of his upbringing. I don't excuse it, but again, it is a big reason. So he was close to his two sisters and mother, but he endured a difficult relationship with his father. He was an alcoholic, and he physically abused his wife and his children constantly. Growing up, he made it a mission to always try. Gacy. He always tried to make his father proud, and everything he did it with keeping his father in mind. He wanted to be recognized by his father. One of his earliest memories was at the age of 4. He remembers his father beating him with a belt because he accidentally, messed up the arrangement of some car engine components that his father was working on. On another occasion, his father struck him across the head with a broomstick, rendering him unconscious. His father regularly belittled him, and he often compared him unfavorably, compared to his sisters, and always accusing him of being dumb and stupid. Even after his arrest, he never held a grudge, and he never said that he hated his father. He actually said, no, I never hated my father, which is really crazy because, as you see, he is not an exemplary father at all. He also remembers that at the age of 6, he stole a truck from from a local neighborhood, a toy truck. He stole a toy truck from a local neighborhood toy store, or local neighborhood store, and his mother made him go back, to return it and to apologize to the owners. Well, the mother also decided to tell Gacy Sr., and Gacy Sr. Decided to beat him with the belt as punishment. And so after this, the mother made it a mission to protect Gacy from the father. But his mother, but with this happening, his mother protecting him, this made Gacy Sr. tell Gacy Jr., oh, you're a mama's boy, you're a sissy, and you're probably going to grow up to be queer. So, in 1949, Gacy's father was informed that he and other boys were caught sexually fondling a young girl. So Gacy's father whipped him with a razor strap as punishment. That same year, Gacy himself was molested by a family friend, a contractor that would take Gacy for rides in his truck, and he would fondle him. So again, another reason for him to be the type of person that he was. Gacy never told his father because he always felt like his father would blame Gacy for this happening. So due to a heart condition, he was ordered by the doctor to not do any like physical sports or any to not be involved in any sports at school, and so he was not really like a popular kid. He was very average, so and he endured a lot of bullying in school. He was often like the assistant, he often assisted truancy officers, and would volunteer to run errands for school or for the neighborhood, for the teachers. So he wasn't a malicious person growing up at all. So during the 4th grade, Gacy began to experience blackouts. He was occasionally hospitalized because of these seizures, and also in 1957 for a burst appendix. Gacy later estimated that between the ages of 14 and 18, he had spent almost a year in the hospital for these episodes. And this attributed to the decline of his grades and his missing school. So eventually this caused him to basically like not finish high school at all. His father actually suspected that these episodes were just for attention, but his mom and his sisters, they all believed him. They all knew that this condition wasn't like just him calling out for attention. Like, he was laying in bed for his burst appendix, and his father told him this. So actually Gacy's medical condition was never conclusively diagnosed. So he grew up with the heart condition, and he grew up with the burst appendix and blacking out and all that stuff, and they never figured out what it was. Actually, one of Gacy's old friends recalled being at Gacy's home and remembering that all of a sudden, like, they were just hanging out, and all of a sudden Gacy Sr. started yelling and shouting at Gacy Jr., and he started beating him in front of the child. So Gacy's mother tried to intervene, but she couldn't do much, and at that point Gacy put up his hands like in self-defense, but he never hit him. And he has said before, like, no, I never hit my father, and that's crazy, like, just standing there and taking it. But also you have to think, like, about how many times, like, his dad belittled him. So in 1960, at 18 years of age, Gacy became involved in politics. He was working as an assistant precinct captain for a Democratic Party candidate in the neighborhood. But all that brought a whole lot of criticism from his father, because he accused him of, being a patsy. So basically, being like a vulnerable person, and always taking orders from these people. So for him, it wasn't even like it wasn't good enough to him. That same year, Gacy became a Democratic Party candidate. His father bought him a car, with the title of the vehicle being in his father's name, until Gacy was able to, complete these monthly payments. The payments took several years, and throughout these years, his father constantly, to punish him, took away the keys. So at this point, he was already an adult, and his father would just confiscate the keys. And on one occasion in 1962, Gacy bought an extra set of keys to try to go around his father's, his father taking away the original keys. And in response to this, his father took off the distributor cap from the vehicle, and he didn't, replace the component until about 3 days. When his father replaced the distributor cap, Gacy left the family home because he had had enough, and he went to Las Vegas, Nevada, where he found work within the ambulance service before he transferred to work and as an attendant at the Palm Mortuary. He worked in the role for 3 months before returning to Chicago. So, while he was working at the Palm Mortuary, he slept behind the embalming areas. He slept in a cot behind the embalming room. So while he was in this role, he observed morticians embalming dead bodies, and later actually confessed that one evening while he was alone, he had jumped into the coffin of a deceased teenage male and began embracing and caressing the body before experiencing a sense of shock. That's creepy. That's so clearly he's already experiencing these type of, it's not necrophilia yet, but it's pretty close. So after experiencing all this, he decided to call his mother and ask her if Gacy Sr. would let him come back home. So he's going back to where all this trauma, going back to all the trauma. When he returned, even though he did not finish high school, he was able to enroll successfully at Northwestern Business College, and he graduated in 1963, shortly after he took a management trainee position at Nunn-Bush Shoe Company. In 64, he was transferred to Springfield to work as a salesman and was later promoted to manager. This is where he met Marilyn Myers, she was his co-worker, and they became engaged later on. After 9 months of courtship, they married in September of 1964. While he was dating Marilyn, he joined the local JCs, which is a type of leadership organization. But he joined the JCs he joined the JCs, but chapter Springfield, so it was in the Springfield area. That same year, Gacy had his second homosexual experience. So, according to Gacy, one of his co-workers one of his colleagues from the Springfield JC's community or organization plied him with drinks and invited him to spend the evening on the sofa. The colleague then performed oral sex upon him while he was drunk. So, in 1965, he rose to the position of vice president of the JCs in Springfield. So, this is when he moves to Waterloo, Iowa. So, Marilyn's father owned, I think it was 3 KFCs in Waterloo, Iowa, and his father-in-law asked Gacy to manage all 3 of the KFCs. So this meant that that Gacy and Marilyn were moving to Waterloo. So they moved into Marilyn's parents' house, which was vacated for them. Gacy joined the local chapter of the JCs. So whenever he was in Springfield, he was in the JCs, and he also was in the JCs in Waterloo, Iowa. So he regularly offered to extend hours to the organization. So he was very, very committed to this organization. He put in 12 to 14 hour days working, and he also put in a whole bunch of hours for the JCs. That same year, Gacy served on the board of directors for Waterloo JCs. At this point, Gacy's wife gave birth to 2 children. A son, Michael, was born February 1966, followed by the daughter named Christine in March 1967. Gacy later said that his life was perfect during this time, and actually I think it's because his father finally told him that he was proud of him and that he was wrong about him. To the point where Gacy's father actually apologized for all the mental abuse and all the physical abuse. So he was fully aware that he was doing these things to him. So the thing about this JC chapter, the JC organization in Waterloo, Iowa, is that they were often involved in wife swapping, prostitution, pornography, and drug use. And Gacy was a part of it. He was fully invested in all of it. He often cheated on his wife with prostitutes, and he actually also held a club in his basement for his employees from KFC. Most of the employees from KFC were teenagers. So he would invite these teenagers, the males only, he would invite these teenagers, and he would let them drink and play pool in his basement. So after these teenagers were given a whole bunch of alcohol, he would make sexual advances at them. And whenever anybody, would say something, they would just would put his would ask him about this stuff. He'd brush it aside, and everybody just believed him. So his first offense was in August of 1967. And he committed his first known sexual assault upon a teenage boy. The victim was 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, the son of a fellow JC. So it was his friend's son. Gacy lured Donald to the clubhouse with the promise of showing him pornographic films. After giving him a whole bunch of alcohol, he persuaded the young boy to perform oral sex on him. Over the following months, several other youths were sexually abused in a similar manner. Including one whom Gacy encouraged to have sex with his wife before blackmailing the youth into performing oral sex upon him. Gacy tricked several teenagers into believing that he was commissioned with conducting homosexual experiments in the interest of scientific research, and would pay each kid $50, which $50 back then was a lot. Which I didn't mention this, but he did make a lump sum of money, because not only was he a political candidate, so he had a lot of income coming from that, but he also had income coming from the 3 KFCs that he managed. So he was set. In March of 1968, Donald finally told his father. So it was a little less than 6 months, or 6 months after he told his father, and Voorhees Sr., which is, his dad, went directly to the police and turned Gacy in. Gacy was later arrested and charged with oral sodomy and attempted assault of a 16-year-old Edward Lynch. So this is another kid as well. Excuse me, I'm congested. So Gacy denied all the charges and even requested a polygraph test. He was granted the polygraph test, but it came out inconclusive because he was too nervous. So Gacy publicly denied any wrongdoing and insisted that the charges against him be dropped, and they were politically motivated by Voorhees Sr., because Voorhees Sr. had opposed Gacy's nomination for the appointment as president of the Iowa JCs. Several, fellow JCs found Gacy's stories very credible, and they actually rallied to his support. However, on May 10th, 1968, Gacy was indicted on the sodomy charge. On August 30th, 1968, Gacy persuaded one of his employees, 18-year-old Russell Schroeder, to physically assault Donald to discourage the boy from testifying against him. So, Donald, which is the first person that he sexually assaulted, he wanted, to to discourage the boy from testifying against him. Russell agreed and lured Voorhees to a secluded spot. He sprayed mace in his face and beat him. Gacy promised to pay Russell $300 if he went through with everything. In September, he lured Donald to an isolated park, sprayed mace into Donald's eyes, and then beat him while shouting that he was not to testify against Gacy. Donald managed to escape and immediately went to the police and identified Russell as the attacker. Russell was arrested the next day. At first, he denied everything and having any involvement, but then eventually he confessed and actually said that Gacy had requested, for him to do this. Gacy was arrested and additionally charged in relation to hiring Russell to assault and intimidate Donald. On September 12th, Gacy was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation at the psychiatric hospital of the State University of Iowa. 2 doctors examined him for 17 days before concluding that he was an antisocial personality disorder, or that he has an antisocial personality disorder, which he was unlikely to benefit from any therapy or medical treatment, and that his behavior pattern was likely to bring him into repeated conflict with society. They were really, foreseeing this. They also stated that he was mentally competent to stand trial. So he received advice from one of his attorneys, and Gacy entered a plea of guilty to 1 count of sodomy in relation to the charges filed against him by Donald. And he also pleaded not guilty to the other charges against him by other young men at an arraignment that was held on November 7, 1968. Gacy told the judge that yes, he had engaged in sexual relations with Donald, but he insisted that Donald had offered him his sexual services, and Gacy was just curious, so he acted out of curiosity. Nobody believed him, and although his lawyers recommended probation, he was convicted of sodomy on December 3rd of 1968 and sentenced to 10 years at Anamosa State Penitentiary. On the day Gacy was convicted and sentenced, his wife, Marilyn, petitioned for divorce, requesting the possessions of the couple's home. Requesting possession of the couple's home, property, sole custody of their 2 children, and subsequent alimony payments. The court ruled in her favor, and the divorce was finalized September 18th, 1969. Gacy never saw his first wife and his children ever again. During his incarceration at Anamosa State Penitentiary, Gacy quickly became a model prisoner. He became head cook within a matter of months. Now, y'all remember, he interacts well with other people, and he was, vice president of the JCs, and he did really well at the other JC chapter. Growing up, he always helped people. He's a people pleaser. He became head cook with a matter of months, and he also joined the inmate JC chapter and increased their membership from 50 to 650 in the span of 18 months. In 1969, Gacy first applied to State of Iowa Board of Parole for early release. His request was denied. In preparation for a second scheduled parole hearing, May 1970, Gacy completed 16 high school credits, for which he obtained his diploma in November 1969, because remember, he hadn't completed school. On Christmas Day of 1969, Gacy's father died of cirrhosis of the liver. Remember, he was an alcoholic. And Gacy was not informed until 2 days after his death. As soon as he found out, he dropped to the floor and sobbed uncontrollably. Y'all remember, he did not have a good relationship with his father. Like his father was an asshole. His father was horrible. And yet he still cried for him. He requested to go to his father's funeral, but was denied. So on June 18th, 1970, Gacy was granted parole with 12 months probation after only serving 18 months of his 10-year sentence. He had oral sex with a teenager. I don't understand. Two of the conditions of his probation were that Gacy would relocate to Chicago to live with his mom, and that he was to observe a 10 p.m. curfew, with the Iowa Board of Parole receiving regular updates as to his progress. Within 24 hours of his release, Gacy relocated to Chicago to live with his mom. He arrived to Chicago on June 19th and shortly thereafter obtained a job as a short order cook in a restaurant. On February 12, 1971, Gacy was charged with sexually assaulting a teenage boy. So this was not even a year after he was released. The boy claimed that Gacy had lured him into his car at a Greyhound bus terminal in Chicago. Now, y'all remember that bus terminal. He drove him to his home where he attempted to force the boy into sex. The complaint was dismissed because the boy failed to appear in court. The Iowa Board of Parole never heard of this, which was a violation of a condition to his parole. And 8 months later, in October 1971, Gacy's parole ended. In the following months, Gacy's records from previous criminal convictions of Iowa were sealed. So nobody saw that he was in prison for sexual sodomy. With the financial assistance from his mother, Gacy bought a house in Norwood Park Township. The address is 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. That is where he resided until he was arrested, and that is where all his known murders were committed. In August 1971, shortly after Gacy and his mother moved into the house, he became engaged to Carol Hoff, a divorcee with 2 young daughters. Carol moved in after the engagement, and once they were married, July of 1972, his mother moved out the house. 1 week before Gacy's wedding, on June 22nd, he was arrested and charged with aggravated battery and reckless conduct. The arrest was in response to the complaint filed by a young man named Jackie D., who informed police that Gacy impersonated a police officer, had flashed a sheriff's badge, and lured him into his car and forced him to perform oral sex. The charges were dropped after the complainant attempted to blackmail Gacy into paying him money in exchange for dropping the charges. So, Gacy had quit his job as a cook and started his own construction business, PDM Contractors. In 1973, Gacy and a teenage employee of PDM Contractors traveled to Florida to view the property Gacy had purchased. On the first night, he raped the teenage boy in their hotel bedroom. The boy later refused to stay in the same room as him, so the boy slept on the beach. Once they returned, the boy began to beat Gacy. Once they returned to Chicago at his home, the boy began to beat Gacy until his mother-in-law, Gacy's mother-in-law, stopped the boy from further attacking Gacy. Gacy lied to his wife and told her that he refused to pay the young boy for poor quality work. So he said that the reason why that boy was beating him was because he refused to pay him. So Gacy's neighbors considered him to be a helpful neighbor. He was active in his local community and hosted annual summer parties in 1974. So through his membership in a local moose club, Gacy became aware of a Jolly Joker clown club, whose members would regularly perform at a fundraising events, parades, in addition to volunteering at hospitals. Um, by late 1975, Gacy had joined the Jolly Jokers and created his own performance character, Pogo the Clown, and Patches the Clown. Gacy designed his own costume, and he also learned how to put his own clown makeup. Although some professional clowns have said that the points, which I'll insert a picture here, the rounded border, they normally do rounded borders instead of like sharp edges, because sharp edges are scarier to children. Gacy is known to have performed as Pogo or Patches at numerous local parties, Democratic Party functions, charitable events, and at children's hospitals. Sometimes he would even go dressed up to his favorite bar, which was the Good Luck Lounge, and he would just say that he had come from an event, even if he hadn't. That's creepy. By 1975, Gacy had told his wife that he was bisexual. After the couple had sex on Mother's Day that year, he informed her that this would be the last time they would ever have sex. He started spending evenings away from home, and he wouldn't come home till like early hours of the morning, and he would just use work as an excuse. His wife observed Gacy bringing teenage boys into the garage and also found gay pornography inside the house. So you see your husband bringing teenage boys to the house at his little club and plying them with alcohol, and you don't think that's weird? What the fuck are you doing? Excuse my language. So they decided to get a divorce in March of 1976. His first murder was the murder of Timothy McCoy. So this was January 2nd of 1972. So this was way back when. So him and his wife got married in July of 1972, and this murder occurred January 2nd of 1972. So a few months prior. So Gacy picked up a 16-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy from a Chicago Greyhound bus terminal. Gacy took Timothy on a sightseeing tour of Chicago, who was traveling from Omaha. Or the boy was traveling from Omaha. After the sightseeing tour, he drove Timothy to his home, and Gacy promised him that in the morning he would take him to the bus station. According to Gacy's later account of the murder, he woke the following morning to find Timothy standing in his bedroom doorway with a kitchen knife. Mind you, he was living with his mom. Where are you, Mom? Gacy leaped from his bed, and Timothy raised both arms in a gesture of surrender, tilting the knife upwards and accidentally cutting Gacy's forearm, which Gacy has a scar of it. He twisted the knife from Timothy's wrist, banged his head against his bedroom wall, kicked him against his wardrobe, and walked towards him. Timothy kicked him in the stomach. Gacy grabbed him and wrestled him to the floor. He then continued to stab him repeatedly in the chest while he straddled him. Gacy claimed that he went to the kitchen and saw the open carton of eggs and a slab of unsliced bacon on his kitchen table. McCoy had also set up a table for two. He had walked into Gacy's room to wake him while holding a kitchen knife that he was using. So this boy was making him breakfast, and he was going to wake him up, and Gacy killed him. Gacy buried McCoy in the crawl space and later covered the youth's grave with a layer of concrete. Remember that crawl space, guys. In an interview after his arrest, Gacy stated that immediately after killing McCoy, he felt totally drained. yet noted that he experienced a mind-numbing orgasm as he killed the young man. He added, "That's when I realized that death was an ultimate thrill." His second known victim, Gacy later stated that the second time he committed murder was around 1974. It was an unidentified teenager with medium brown hair. Gacy strangled him and he kept the body in the closet before burying him. Gacy later stated that the fluid leaked onto the carpet from the mouth and the nose, and the fluid stained the carpet. As a result of this experience, Gacy said that he started stuffing cloth rags or the boys' underwear in their mouths, that way they wouldn't leak. This boy was buried about 15 feet from the barbecue pit in Gacy's backyard. So in 1975, his business began to expand, PDM Contractors, and began working 12 to 16-hour days. Gacy mentioned that during this time, he also began increasing the frequency of his excursions for sex with young men. He referred to them as cruising. Many of his employees at PDM Contractors consisted of high school students and young men. One of them was a 15-year-old boy named Anthony Antonucci, whom Gacy hired May 1975. On July of 1975, Gacy arrived at Anthony's home while the boy was alone because he had previously injured himself at work. Gacy gave the boy alcohol like he had previously done to other kids and wrestled the boy to the floor and cuffed Anthony's hands behind his back. The cuffs on Anthony's right hand were loose, so he was able to get his hand out after Gacy had left the room. When Gacy returned to the room, the boy being a wrestler, he jumped on Gacy, got a hold of the handcuff keys, and cuffed Gacy's hands behind his back. Gacy screamed threats at the boy until he agreed to leave Anthony's home if he just let him go. Anthony agreed, and Gacy left the house. Anthony later recalled that Gacy had also told him as he was laying on the floor, so Gacy was laying on the floor, he said, "Not only are you the only one who got out of the cuffs, you got them on me." A week later, on July 29th of 1975, another one of Gacy's employees, John Butkovich, disappeared. A day before John disappeared, John threatened Gacy over 2 weeks' back pay. Gacy later admitted that he lured John to his home while his wife, Carol, and his stepchildren were away from home to supposedly settle his wages. So John went over to Gacy's home to settle, wages. Gacy conned the young man into allowing his wrist to be cuffed behind his back, at which point Gacy strangled him to death and buried his body under the concrete floor of his garage. Gacy later admitted to have sat on the kid's chest for a while before killing him. John's Dodge sedan was later found abandoned in a parking lot with his wallet inside and the keys still in the ignition. Butkovich's father called Gacy, who claimed he was happy to help search for the young man, but was sorry that John had ran away. Gacy was questioned about Butkovich's disappearance. He was questioned about John's disappearance, and he admitted that Butkovich and 2 of his friends had arrived at his house demanding Butkovich's overdue pay, but claimed that all 3 of the young men had left after a compromise had been reached. The following 3 years, John's parents called the police over 100 times, urging them to investigate Gacy. They never did. So John Wayne Gacy's cruising years, remember that's what he calls them whenever he was looking for these young boys, were from 1976 to 1978. The majority of Gacy's murders were committed between 1976 and 1978, which he later referred to as his cruising years, now that he had his house to himself because he had a divorce. 1 month later, after his divorce was finalized, Gacy abducted and murdered 18-year-old Daryl Sampson. He was last seen April 6, 1976 in Chicago. And I'm sorry if I am mispronouncing any of these names, but 5 weeks later, May 14th, a 15-year-old boy, Randall Reffitt, disappeared walking home from Senn High School. He was gagged with a cloth, causing him to die of asphyxiation. Hours after Reffitt was abducted, a 14-year-old Samuel Stapleton vanished while walking to his home from his sister's apartment. They were buried in the same grave in the crawl space, that I told you about before. On June 3rd, 1976, Gacy killed a 17-year-old Michael Bonin. He disappeared while traveling from Chicago to Waukegan. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. He was strangled with a rope and buried in the crawl space. Y'all see a pattern? 10 days later, a 16-year-old named William Carroll, also known as Billy, was murdered and buried directly beneath Gacy's kitchen. Carroll may have been the first of 4 males known to have been murdered between June 13th and August 6, 1976, who were buried in the common grave located beneath Gacy's kitchen laundry room. The 3 identified youths that were killed between June 13th and August 6th were aged between 16 and 17-year-old, whereas the only unidentified male known to have been murdered between these dates is a man, medium dark brown hair, estimated to have been aged between 23 and 30 years old, and to be about 5 feet, 5'1" and 5'6" tall. This man was also missing his upper front teeth at the time of his disappearance, leading investigators to believe this particular victim most likely wore dentures. He was buried directly beneath the body of a 16-year-old Minnesota young man named James Hackinson, who is last known to have phoned his family on August 5th and whose body was itself buried directly beneath that of a 17-year-old Bensonville young man named Rick Johnston, who was last seen alive on August 6th. On July 26, 1976, Gacy employed an 18-year-old man named David Cram. August of that year, David Cram moved in with Gacy. The next day, Gacy conned Cram into putting on the handcuffs while David was drunk. Gacy swung Cram around while holding the chain links of the cuffs, and then informed him that he intended to rape him. Cram, who was in the army for a year, kicked Gacy in the face, then freed himself from the handcuffs while Gacy was lying flat. 1 month later, Gacy appeared to Cram outside of his bedroom door with the intention to rape him and said, "Dave, you really don't know who I am. Maybe it would be good if you give me what I want." Cram resisted Gacy's attempt to assault him, and Gacy left the room. Cram moved out after this incident and left PDM contractors as well, but he did do a few side jobs for Gacy through the following 2 years. After Cram left Gacy's home, another employee of PDM contractors, 18-year-old Michael Rossi, moved into Gacy's home. 2 further unidentified males are estimated to have been killed between October 1976. One of the victims was buried directly above William Carroll, who was murdered June 13th. This unidentified male was estimated to have been 14 to 24 years of age and had light brown hair. The second unidentified male, likely to have been murdered between August and October of 1976, is a young man with dark brown hair, wavy hair, aged between 18 and 22 years old. He was known to have suffered from an abscessed tooth at the time of his murder. He was buried in the northeast corner of the crawl space. He was actually an employee of PDM Contractors who stated that Gacy had actually told them to dig a trench on October 5th of 1976, which is during the time of the murder that I just stated. So it is likely that that is he it's likely that that was the boy's grave. So guys, I'm going to continue with the next part of this video tomorrow. So like I said, this is a very sensitive subject, but there's more, unfortunately. Remember, there are 33 victims that we know of. So guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know if you have any questions so far. I will address them. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. Bye.